Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. So today I wanted to do some kind of discussion or a chat. I'm not quite sure what to call this, but I wanted to talk about reading deeply. I think the concept of reading widely and reading diversely is something that is quite popular on BookTube and in general in the bookish community. I feel like we talk about it quite a lot. Reading new things, new kind of stories, and exposing ourselves to various different things through books, which I think is wonderful, and it is something that I've definitely been implementing in my reading in the last couple of years, especially I think since BookTube, increasing the amount of genres I expose myself to, the kind of authors that I encounter. And I love all of that, and this video is not to say that that is a bad thing at all, but this is something that I've been thinking about, especially I think at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, that I really love the concept of reading deeply. So this is, it could be so many different ways of doing this, but I think I see it as a way to connect the dots between books, between different kinds of media that we are exposed to, and sort of building bridges between the various stories that we are part of. So I think it doesn't necessarily have to be like the opposite of reading diversely or widely, but it is the best way I can describe it is to just sort of immerse yourself in reading in a way. I think it is mostly about sort of a reading approach. When you read widely, it is it can feel a bit fragmentary if you're constantly being exposed to new things and there's nothing to bind them together, and I've found for myself that I can often find I can often find it difficult to sort of hold on to that, hold on to information, or really be immersed in that kind of world if it is constantly like islands of information and stories. But one of the things that I've been trying to do recently is to, as I said, build bridges between stories, connect the dots, and kind of create a framework or a network of the books that I'm reading. But it doesn't have to be just within literature. I think there are ways to connect the things you're reading with other things, like real life experiences. So I'll get into some examples of what I mean when I say reading deeply, and this is just going to be sort of a tribute to that reading approach that I've been enjoying playing with recently. So one of the ways you could do this is to reread books. I think often when we talk about rereading and why it is so, it can be so valuable, is that we get new things out of it. And it is sort of deepening the reading experience with each reading of the same story. The more you pick up on details, you might have new information going into the book. Sort of all of the books that you've been reading in between the readings might have changed your perspective, but it can also just be that you see new things, that you have some kind of starting point, you have some familiarity with the book and the framework of it, so you sort of have new things to look out for. Another way I find that I've been doing, I think for a while, and that has partly been inspired by Olive, from a book Olive, is to combine fiction with non-fiction around the same topic or historical figure or period of time. So it could be as closely linked as you want it to, but it could also be quite the bond doesn't have to be obvious. But combining fiction and non-fiction, I think, is a way to deepen knowledge and understanding of, for example, a different time or a different way of life. Combining them adds a lot to both reading experiences, and it's something I've really enjoyed doing. Another example of something I did last year was I did a video called Follow the Path. That basically I followed I picked up a book, and then one of the books referenced in that book I also read, and a book referenced in that book I read and continued on for, I think, 4 steps. And it's quite easy to do the kind of follow the path. What I basically mean by that is follow the references, because literature is so linked with what came before it. So it's quite easy to sort of follow the web of or the network of literature and specific literary works, and it's a way to see what influenced the reader, the writer, and to understand where they were coming from, what they're basing their work on, what kind of thought processes or theories that they were influenced by, and everything like that. All of their inspiration and things like that. So I think it will add something to the most recent book, but also it is a fun experience in general to just go down a rabbit hole and follow the path that is already drawn for you. You could obviously do it in the other direction as well, like pick up a book like a classic and then read books that were inspired by that classic. That would be sort of the opposite direction of doing the same thing. You could also do things like, I talked about combining nonfiction and fiction, but you could even do it with like several fiction books or several nonfiction books, combining them with other kind of categories. For example, reading contemporary writers together, or reading them side by side, or one after the other, to sort of build a larger picture of the book itself and creating the context around them in your mind. I think that is sort of really what I'm getting at in the reading deeply, is when you pick up a book, it stands on its own in a way, because especially if you're going into it quite blind and it's about a topic that you're not familiar with, it basically stands on itself, and it can be quite daunting, especially if it is a book talking about something that you're not familiar with. The next book you pick up around the same topic or by the same author will have a sort of starting point. You will have some kind of foundation to build upon, and it's easier, I think, to make your reading both enjoyable and immersive and meaningful, I think, through building some kind of threads that combine with each other to build a larger framework. So another way that you can read deeply, as I wanted to mention as the last kind of thing, is to combine reading with other media or other experiences. So for example, going to the Natural History Museum, if you're reading some kind of nature writing, that is something that I've done recently. Or go travel to a specific part of the world, or even just a city or a place within your city. It doesn't have to be something really extravagant. It could be things like going for a walk to see a specific kind of tree if you're reading about that tree, or taking your book with you for a specific place. Like, let's say you're reading about a character who's in a coffee shop, and you move yourself to a coffee shop to be, so that your own experience somehow reflects something in the book or somehow connects with it. I think for me it has been a very rewarding kind of thing to not just look at reading as something completely scaled off or separate from the rest of my life, to sort of make it a central thing in various different things that I do. Reading deeply doesn't necessarily have to affect your selection of books. You can still read widely, you can still read diversely, but I think if you have the kind of approach to your reading that you're looking for something to create knots with the various threads that you pick up, then you can usually find something. Like, it can be something very small, something that you just otherwise would have passed by, but that if you are aware of it, if you are sort of on the lookout for it, you can usually find something that binds various books together. And it could be something small, like for example, a book, I've recently read a book about honeybees, and I think in another of the books that I read, there was a mention of honey making, which obviously directly links to the honeybee, but it was a very small part. It was only one page that was mentioned at all. So I think it just felt to me even more special to have that connection, even though they weren't necessarily big connections. Basically, I think that it's about a reading approach that creates both comfort in the fact that you have something to lean on, you know something of what you're approaching. Usually when we pick up a new book, we do feel this kind of, we need to sort of settle into the book. But if you're reading several books by the same author, you don't usually have that kind of experience each time you're picking up one of their books, because you've started to become familiar with them, you start to get to know their quirks and their style, and it's easier to just settle into the book. And I think that is also one of the reasons that rereading favorites, like rereading Harry Potter, is such a popular thing. And I think it could be the same thing could be done with various different ways that you that you're just sort of actively building a framework within which you sort of sort through all of the stories that you're exposed to. I'm not sure if this is making much sense, but I would love to hear how you approach your reading. Do you know of any other ways to sort of deepen your reading experience, and if so, what do you do? I would really love to hear your thoughts about this topic and the various ways that I've mentioned, like rereading, reading more books by one author, experiencing physical experiences like life experiences with the reading and combining those, combining fiction and nonfiction, all the things that I've talked about. I would love to hear about your thoughts, and if you do any of these things and if they deepen your reading experience, or if you're coming from a completely different standpoint, I would love to hear that as well. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.